Hello and welcome everybody to the Skills Kickstart session on routing tools and best practices. Our presenter today is going to be Chris, and we are going to get started here in just a moment, get everybody time to get in, get settled, and get logged in. So we will go ahead and get started here in just a moment. While we do wait for everybody, if you have any questions during this session, please don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A, put them in the chat, and we'd be happy to answer them. I know there is another session after this, so if we don't get to your question at the end or in the middle, we will follow up with you. So I just wanted to mention that. But like I previously said, we will get started here in just maybe like 30 seconds, get everybody some time to get logged in. Alrighty, and it looks like we got a good chunk of people coming in, so we're just going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who did just join, this is the Skills Kickstart session on routing tools and best practices with our presenter, Chris. So with that, let's go ahead and take it away, Chris.
Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be covering routing tools and best practices, like Alex had mentioned. This is a follow-up session on routes, plans, and events. So continuing to build on that knowledge that we gained on a previous video. My name is Chris Thompson. I've been with Encompass for a few years now. Started out as an analyst and got my knowledge on the admin side, as well as some ops knowledge on the WMS teams. And most recently, I've transitioned onto the onboarding team, where I've been an implementation consultant now for about a year and a half. When I'm not working at Encompass, I enjoy doing all things that are Colorado related. I'm a big avid runner and hiker. But that's enough about me. Let's go ahead and get started. Today's agenda, we're going to cover some of the tools that Encompass offers for routing. We'll touch on auto create routes. From auto create routes, we'll jump into mapped routing, where we can play with the sequencing of the routes that we have generated. We can also touch on route optimizer while we're in mapped routing. Once we finalized our routes and the sequencing of our stops, I think the most one of my favorite tools that we could get to talk about is Stop Manager, where we can review aligned stops, and then finally we'll hit on the routing report and do a quick recap. So with that said, the tools that we're going to be covering today, auto create routes. This tool allows you to generate routes based on criteria that you input into the tool, whether that be a list of customers. You can set thresholds based on how many times you want to see or create stops per week. Mapped routing then allows you, like I was saying, to balance out those routes. You can drag and drop stops between different routes. You can review what that looks like on a mapped view. And then Stop Manager allows us to double check the work that we've gone through with creating and generating the routes and then resequencing those routes in mapped routing. And basically, this allows us to make sure that our pre-sale stops are aligned with our delivery days. And then the routing report serves as that final check to confirm all those changes. And it works as a great tool to bounce back with your reps and gain feedback on. So auto create routes. It's an important thing to note on this particular tool is that we only allow you to generate routes into an inactive route version. And this is done by design to avoid any conflict with the current route version that you're working and running on. We don't want you to accidentally generate 25 routes that show up into a user's handheld essentially the following day. That's the catch that we're trying to avoid. This tool allows you to select a subset of customers. We see that a lot of use with this tool when you're trying to break out specific large chains onto their own routes, or when you're trying to reroute by city. You can also use a specific defined list of customers that you get from your rep. So say your sales rep visits a set of 10 customers on Monday, they can provide you with that list of customers, and you can import that into this tool using an Excel doc. Uh, you can set your stop frequency, and this is dictated based on how many cases you sell, or if you'd rather use it based on dollar volume or total weight, we allow for those options as well. And you can set your thresholds for multiple stops per week and which days you choose or would choose to make those stops. You can route settings to limit the max number of cases or stops per route that's created. And then once you're done with all these, you can create those routes, and it jumps you into our next tool, which is mapped routing. So this gives you a breakout of what this looks like to begin with, kind of like a normal report that you would see within Encompass. You can bring in any columns that you choose to. This allows you to also work on active or inactive route versions. And then you can also choose specific days a week or routing activities. And then once you're satisfied with what you pulled back into your report view, you can click show routes, and that jumps you into the map tool, which is an overlay of basically Google Maps, and it pin drops all the stops in which you can drag and drop stops onto different routes. I do want to note that the mapped routing dashboard that we're going to be covering today is different than the mapped routing tool that you may have seen in Delivery Optimizer. The main difference, even though that they're very similar in how they appear, is that we will be editing routes and stops versus the tool that is in Delivery Optimizer, which updates plans and events. So important distinction, and keep that in mind. Stop Manager, my favorite tool that we have for routing tool. This allows you to look for misaligned stops. You can utilize this tool on inactive or active route versions, and we provide useful hyperlinks to allow you to make edits, quick edits on those stops to realign those stops with the pre-sale route versus the delivery route. And then finally, our routing report. The routing report, this is a great tool to use. Once you've made those final tweaks in mapped routing, you've resequenced, you've gone through and made sure your stops are aligned, you can then use the routing tool to double check and confirm your work, and then print out routes and their stops in sequence and have the delivery rep or sales rep confirm, is this, what I'm expecting to see, or provide feedback. And then you can sit down with those reps to make those tweaks if needed back in mapped routing. With that said, let's go ahead and jump into our test site. I've logged into our training site. I've landed on the customer search splash screen or dashboard here. The tools that we're going to be interacting with can be found through the search bar by searching for auto create routes and hopping over to the dashboard. You can also get to the tools that we're going to be working with by expanding the tabs on the left-hand side and scrolling down to logistics. Underneath logistics, we have our routing home. And routing home is going to land on our daily routing practices, where you may be familiar with import conflicts over allocated products, but we want to toggle over to managing routes. And on this dashboard, we have the tools that we're going to interact with. We have our auto create routes tool down here. There's some reports on the right-hand side, as well as other tools that we're going to be visiting with today. So let's go ahead and hop into auto create routes. I went ahead and pre-generated an inactive route version to work with today. It is important, and as I noted, when utilizing auto create routes, we are generating routes into inactive route versions. And in the drop-down view here, you're only going to be able to toggle onto an inactive route version. The one that I am going to be working with today is going to be Sterling B. And how I like to think about this tool is very similar to reading a book. We'll start up at the top and we'll just work our way down through the steps. So first step, let's go ahead and select our route version. And we can move on to the second step. So there's a couple of different options here that we can choose and different routes that we can take. We can generate routes based on selected routes. And what this looks like is if you click Add Routes, you have the option to pull in routes, or you can filter by route type if needed, or even expand this out to route version. I'm going to go ahead and close that. For today's example, let's go ahead and say we have a sales rep that works with a chain of customers, and we can go ahead and hop over to this other tab and generate our routes based on selected customers. When toggling over here, we get a couple of different options. We can add customers, and what this looks like is just a simple customer search. We can input each individual customer. We can search by chain if we'd like to, or by sales rep or customer type. We can also hop into import customers. And what this does is if you're working out of an Excel spreadsheet, say that rep comes to you and provides you with that information, you can import that document from your computer. For my example, I downloaded the customer list filtered to a specific sales rep. So I'm going to go ahead and hit open. And this gives me the available columns that exist within the document. Always best practice, let's link on customer ID and hit select. And you can see it's returned a list of customers for us to work with. We got some tipsy corners in there and some booze clues, as well as some address information and some useful hyperlinks that link to the customer page. We can select all of them or uncheck them and check as we go. If I only want to work with a certain set of customers and then expand that out to the rest. Things to think about is like if I only want to generate routes for say 3 customers today and then come back and work on the others, I can do that. But for our example, let's go ahead and select them all. Once I'm satisfied with my customer list, we can hop on down to our next step here, which is setting up those scheduled stops. We can view and pull in and populate our data and ultimately our routes by looking at sales history. So for example, if I wanted to do a new route version for the upcoming winter months, I would want to review my sales history for last year, and we can start by setting our end dates at, we'll say, November 21st of 2023. And we can bring that out through our end date and say we want this route version to run, I don't know, through the winter solstice. We have some different options for our phasing and how we want to phase out our customers. Those options include cases or case equivs, dollar volume. Perhaps you're building out your routes and your trucks based on weight. If weight is an important factor for you, that's also an option. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at cases. And then we can start to think about how we want to do our phasing. How this works is how do we want to see our customers? So once every 4 weeks, we would set up 0 to 4 cases. Maybe once every 2 weeks, we want to see them based on 5 cases. And if we want to see them twice a week, what should that case threshold be? So we got some defaults to work with, 5, 25, and 100. We can always jump in and edit these if I want to say, visit these customers more frequently, if they're buying 75 cases or more. But for today, let's just go ahead and leave it at our default value of 100, 25, and 5. If we look over here on the right-hand side, we have some different options to choose from. The first one that I want to highlight is setting our working days. This is going to feed into how we want to view our twice a week stops. So by default, Encompass is going to select Monday through Friday. If I wanted to bring in Saturday, I could just hit Shift and click on that. Or if I'm only concerned about working Monday through Thursday, just click and drag. Same thing exists for setting our twice a week stops. We got some default values of Monday and Thursday and Monday and Wednesday. I do want to caution and take note if we're setting up our pre-sell days in advance to make sure we're aligning with what we want to set for our twice a week stops. Once we're satisfied with our phasing options, we can jump down to setting up our route settings. So by default, Encompass is going to say we want to generate these routes with a start time of 6 a.m., but we can always jump in and edit these and say our drivers come in and they start at 4 a.m. By default, we're going to say, hey, we're going to deliver 1,000 stops per route per day, which seems a little excessive. So let's go ahead and drop that down to 100. When generating our routes, we do need to add a vehicle as well as sales and delivery reps. So one thing I want to note is that our route versions are location specific, as is our vehicles. So this tool is going to return every vehicle that exists within Encompass and that's been set up. So if you have access to multiple locations, just take note that you're selecting the correct vehicle for the location that you're generating your routes for. I peeked ahead. I know I want to work out of this box truck because that aligns with the location that I've set up on my inactive route version. For sales rep, I'll just go ahead and leave this as Kathy, and we'll say Kathy is also doing the deliveries. We can update our max cases per route if we wanted to. By default, we're going to set it at 1,000. I think that's a good number to start with. And we're going to default our route numbers at 100, and these are going to increment in tens. So we'll start at 100. If we generate a couple of different routes, the next one will be 110, 120, and so on and so forth. We do need to select our pre-sell activity. For this example, I'm going to go ahead and say we're pre-selling 2 days in advance, and we'll leave our delivery activity as delivery. There is a couple of different options to choose from, whatever activities you have set up. So if we were doing pedal sell routes, we could select that, but for today, we'll work out of our delivery activity. And finally, our route type. Our route type is going to return all the route types that exist within our route types table. So one thing to note with route types, this feeds into your pick rules. So say I was building out our routes for Kathy and she works out of a side loader truck. Perhaps I have side loader set up as a route type. I would want to make sure that I'm selecting that because then that ultimately feeds into how we pick and load our products. For our example today, let's go ahead and work out of the Sterling default route type. And now that we've done that, we can hop down to our next step. So what kind of routes do we want to generate? We have the option for pre-sell routes, delivery routes, or we can select both pre-sell and delivery. And then how do we want to optimize our routes? It defaults to shortest distance, and that's going to be distance from your start points and end points if you've set those up. But Encompass, we always like to recommend setting this to service windows if you have those set up for your customers. Now that I've hit step 6, we can give it a quick look through again. We're generating routes into Sterling B, which is inactive. We've added our customers. We're pulling in our sales history from last year because we want to create a new route version for this upcoming winter months. We're going to set our phasing based on cases. We've updated our route settings, selected our vehicle and our reps and our activities. We can go ahead and hit create routes. As this is processing, it's generating those routes, and you can see it takes you to the next tool that we're going to be utilizing. This tool is our mapped routing tool. By default, we're going to return the route version that we're working out of that we just generated those routes. You do have the option to select any other route version that you like. We are going to return both inactive and active route versions. We have the ability to pull in account status. This is going to filter back to our customer account status. If we wanted to look at specific days of the week, we could choose those. So if I was only concerned about active customers on a Monday, I could select that. We could use routes from specific route versions that exist if I want to pull those in. And then by default, we're only going to be looking at route activity of delivery. And then it pulls over those start and end dates that we had set in our auto create routes tool. So let me go ahead. I'm just going to grab all days of the week. And instead of looking at only delivery, I'm going to hit any value because I want to pull in my pre-sell routes that I generated as well. Go ahead and hit show routes. That's going to regenerate our report. It is grouped by activity. So we have our delivery routes up here at the top with the information that we've defined in our columns over here on the left-hand side. So it looks like we have some uh, pick, uh, picking options. We can bring in selling unit of measure if we wanted to, and it's going to generate our report down here on the bottom. We also have our pre-sell routes that we had generated. So it looks like we're delivering on a Monday and Wednesday, and we're pre-selling on a Thursday and Monday. To hop into the Google Maps overlay that I was talking about earlier, we just need to select our routes. We can select them all by clicking our checkbox up here. If I was only concerned about looking at delivery, I could just checkbox those and hop into mapped routing, but let's go ahead and grab our pre-sales as well. When I click the mapped routing button, it jumps us into a view that probably looks familiar if you've interacted with mapped routing on Delivery Optimizer. We have our route information up here along the top. We have the ability to select additional routes and bring those in by clicking this button. We can pull in existing routes that exist on other route versions. We could deselect those routes if I did bring those in. If I click add routes, this is going to jump us over to an actual add routes from the table view in which you can create new routes. We have the ability to optimize our routes. So if I checkbox a couple of our, let's see, let's look at our Mondays, delivery and pre-sell. Actually, excuse me, Monday and Wednesday deliveries. And if I tap on optimize routes, this allows us to pull stops that exist from our one route and move them over to another route based on, do we want to optimize our routes on number of stops, or perhaps I want to set and update case counts and optimize our routes that way. We have the ability to then resequence those stops based on, is it the closest stop to the warehouse or the furthest stop to the warehouse that I want to hit first? Or I could do reverse sequence or shortest distance if needed. To do that, if I wanted to pull routes from, say, Delivery Monday, and I wanted to give them to Delivery Wednesday, how do I want to optimize these is what I would want to think about. So currently, we're set up with a max number of stops for 8. I could then switch that to say, I only want to see 6 customers on a Monday, and perhaps I want to see 4 on Wednesday. I can click optimize routes, gives me a little message about our max cases, but you can see here that we've pulled those over and optimized those. So as we work our way down, we have the ability to pull in some route information through here. So I have the ability to hide our routes. We minimize our data view. I can bring those in by clicking the eyeball. I can view individuals or reduce those from our view. We have the ability to update our color of our route. So if we want to see our pre-sales in, say, lime green, we can update those colors, hide our routes, and then show, excuse me, just our pre-sell routes. We have the ability to update our user records on on these routes. So, if I don't want Kathy visiting our pre-sell on Monday, and perhaps that should go to Carlos, I have the ability to update that. We also have the ability to update our activities on our routes. So if I don't want to pre-sell 2 days in advance and maybe I only wanted to pre-sell 1 day in advance, I can update that for my Monday route. And then over here we have some stop information, how many stops we're seeing, what's our dollar volume that we're expected to sell, some travel time information, and route cost if we've updated our costing per mile. Down here on the map view, some tools to work with. Our little crop tool essentially allows us to draw squares around our stops and interact with those. So if I highlight one and click Edit Stop, I have the ability to pull in and update the activity for those stops, our delivery, our pre-sales. We can set phasing and sequencing if we needed to. The hand button just allows me to drag and move our mapped view around. We have the ability to draw in county lines with these guys here. Just a different way to select other customers if I didn't want to work with the hard lines of the squares. We can pull in our data view by toggling on the eyeball for our all routes. We can hide that, and we can also hide our route lines. I'm going to go ahead and bring in all of our routes, and let's work with just our pre-sales. So currently, we generated a couple of different pre-sell options, or routes, I should say, that were optimized based on the criteria that we had defined within our auto create routes tool. You'll notice here that we're pre-selling to Booze Clues on a Monday and a Thursday, and Tipsy Corner 5 on a Monday and Thursday as well. But say I wanted to pre-sell on a couple other Tipsy Corners and balance out these routes, I can click and drag and drop from one route to the other. I also have the ability to drag and drop and update sequencing within the route. So if I wanted to see and visit Tipsy Corner 5 first, then work my way to Booze Clues, I have that option. You also have the option to resequence the route in bulk based on the drop down here. So a couple of different options that we have. We can resequence based on furthest stop from our warehouse, our service windows, or shortest distance. And we can pull in our distance and view the distance between stops if we wanted to. Clicking on this customer gives us some information and some links. We can hop over and review our customer info. We get our address down here, and we can update our geocode if we wanted to. Within this view, we also have the ability to update our start and end points. So, for example, if I didn't want my pre-sell to end at the warehouse, and perhaps I just wanted it to end back at where Kathy started at, I can do so. These start and end points populate from your map points table. So as long as those have been populated, we can update our routing information as needed. Once we're satisfied with going through and optimizing our routes and perhaps resequencing these within mapped routing, you can hit Save Changes. And this will save the changes that we made to our routes and our stops, which brings us over to our next tool that I want to highlight.
Hey, Chris, we did get a question about mapped routing real quickly before we head on.
Yeah,
So when adjusting the activity on the route level, will that also adjust all the stops on that route for the day?
yes, it will. It will. So yeah, if you update pre-sell 2 days in advance, that will cascade down to the stop level as well. So say if I wanted to pre-sell 4 days in advance on Monday. That will then cascade down to what I have set over here. Good question. All right, so we've hit on mapped routing. We've resequenced our routes, our pre-sell routes, and our delivery routes. The next tool that we want to hop over to, if we go back to our routing home and jump over to managed or managing routes, is our stop manager. So stop manager, a really cool tool. This allows us to view all route versions that we've generated. Again, we were working out of Sterling B. We have the ability to filter to just specific customers if we're concerned with only a certain customer or customer type, or perhaps it's a chain that you're wondering about. But the most important toggle or radio button that we want to show is our customers with misaligned stops. So I've selected my route version. We want to review misaligned stops. And when I show stops, it is going to populate all the customers that currently exist within this route version that have misaligned stops. So for example, the Tipsy Corner 7 has a delivery on Wednesday and a pre-sell on Thursday of 2 days in advance. So this kind of acts as a check for us to consider, what do we want to do? Do we want to pre-sell after we've already delivered? Probably not. So as I was saying earlier, we have the ability to update our stop information by clicking the edit button or the pencil button. And if we're delivering on a Wednesday, perhaps we don't want to pre-sell on a Thursday, and instead we should be pre-selling on a Monday. I'm going to go ahead and save that change, and it's going to jump us back into Stop Manager, and you can see that Tipsy Corner 7 has dropped off. So a good practice that I recommend is going through after you've generated some routes and made tweaks within mapped routing is hopping over to the Stop Manager, and let's just confirm that, our pre-sell stops are lining up with our delivery stops. If we review just the chain that I was working with, and it was the Tipsy Corner chain, and I'm going to uncheck show customers with misaligned stops. What this looks like and what you would want this to show you is if we expand all, green is good, right? We want our aligned stops to populate back in green. And then scrolling down here, there's just a few more stops that are misaligned that we need to work with. Oops, that was our delivery stop. Let's update our pre-sell stop. And this is going to be the same problem. We're pre-selling after our delivery date. I suspect that's going to be the same for all of these because I balanced out my pre-sell routes. So this one, we're pre-selling on a Monday and delivering on a Monday. So instead of pre-selling on a Monday, let's sell to them on Thursday for a delivery on Monday. And this is going to be the same problem. So we'll update our pre-sell route from Monday to Thursday and hit save changes. So as you work through that, ideally your misaligned stops should return no results. That's what we are going for. So now that we've aligned our stops from the routes that we've generated, the final piece that we want to touch on is going to be our routing report.
And
So we
I
hop.
did get one more question too before you go into that next or that last tool. For auto creating routes, if we wanted to avoid misalignment, could we do that using the auto create routes?
Yeah, by default, the auto create routes is going to create aligned stops. The stops that we're displaying for the Sterling B route version that were misaligned were a result of me dragging and dropping and resequencing the tools, or using the mapped routing tool to resequence those pre-sell stops. So by default, when we utilize auto create routes, it should generates aligned stops.
Perfect. And then just as a best practice, is it recommended to use the autocrate to create both pre-sale and delivery, or depending on circumstances, can you also just do it solely for pre-sale routes?
You can do it solely based on for pre-sale routes if you want to generate your pre-sales first and then come back at a later date and take a crack at your delivery. Yeah, by all means, you can generate those as well. Um, the example that I was working on, I just wanted to throw in some pre-sale routes and delivery routes to work off of, but it's kind of a la carte. It's whatever works best for the user.
Great,
Good
thanks.
question. All right, let's jump back over to our routing home dashboard and go over to our managing routes and the routing report. So the routing report, as I was talking about earlier, kind of acts as our final check um, to see the work that we're putting in and make sure that we've generated our routes, we got our pre-sales, we got our delivery routes in there, and we got our stop information in there. But if we pull up our report here, what I like to think of the routing report is like that final check, right? So we're grouping by route and we're ordering by delivery date. We have a couple of different options to choose from for our group buys and order buys, and a couple of different columns that we can bring in. So by default, we're going to bring in our route, delivery day, some stop customer information, and our pre-sale days. But if we scroll down, the two that I think of when I think about the routing report is our sequencing. So we have our pre-sale sequence and our delivery sequence. And if we regenerate this report, we're going to get that sequence information here. So what this works as I was saying, is kind of like that final check. So what you could do with this report is share this report with Kathy, our sales and delivery rep, and have Kathy go through and just double check, like, does this sequence make sense to you on a sales perspective and on a delivery perspective? Are we hitting the correct stops based on what you would expect and your knowledge of driving this particular route? And if Kathy comes back and says, no, I think I would rather go to Brews and Banter, um, first on my pre-sale sequence and then work my way down, we can then take that information and either re-import it or jump back over to mapped routing and make those tweaks. We also provide some hyperlinks here for stop IDs, so you can jump over to those particular stops and review the information and update routing information or customer information or activity if needed, or come back in and filter to just specific chains within your route version. So, and with that, jump back over to our slide deck here. So some key takeaways, right? We have the auto create routes tool. This allows us to generate routes based on the criteria that we define on our stop information. We can pull in certain customers or routes that we want to work with and generate routes into an inactive route version. Once we're satisfied with that criteria and we hit create routes, that takes us over to mapped routing, where we can then optimize and resequence those routes, make fine-tuned tweaks. Stop Manager, awesome tool for inactive and active route versions to find those errors. If we created any miscellaneous errors when we were doing that sequencing, and realign those stops, those pre-sale stops, with our expected delivery days. And then that routing report tool is just kind of your final check and balance with your rep. Does the sequence look correct? Is this what we're expecting for our delivery stops and our pre-sale stops? And with that, I'd like to open it up to any final questions.
Yeah, and before we get into questions, I also wanted to just kind of ask you as far as a user interface. I know we've kind of gone along through this as a sequence or more of an order of operations, example like going from mapped routing to stop manager, but could users go in and kind of use these tools a la carte, or does it have to be in that specific order of operations?
Yeah, you can definitely use these tools that we covered in like an a la carte sort of fashion. Um, the sequence that I followed more or less follows the, hey, I have a new route version that I need to roll out. And what are some tools that we have in Encompass to help me get through those steps in a sequential order? But if you're concerned about misaligned stops in your current active route version, by all means, absolutely hop into the stop manager tool and review and look for those misaligned stops and make those updates as you need. Same thing with like the routing report. If your sales rep is coming to you and noticing that your stops are out of sequence for their expected sales day, and they would want to update that based on what their knowledge is of the area, you can use that routing report and then hop into mapped routing and make those adjustments as needed. Good question.
And we did get a few questions come in, so we can start going over those. So once a route version is auto-created, can it be deleted if we don't like the results?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Let's hop back over to our training site. And if we jump over to route versions. So I was working out of the Sterling B. This is inactive. If I'm if I generated these routes and I realized it was a mistake, like I didn't bring in the correct customer information that I needed for Kathy, and I imported, say, Charlie's pre-sale customers and delivery customers, you can always just jump over here and delete these routes out and then start over. And then you can, yeah, jump back over into the auto create routes tool and regenerate those.
Awesome. And then another question that we had is concerning the mapped routing tool. Could you talk a little bit more about making edits between all phases or changing all four phases in one session?
Sure thing. So we're talking about the phases up here. Um, yeah, so I didn't touch on this. I left it as all phases, but if I wanted to make safe changes to just phases 1 and 3, I could use those radio buttons to return the different information that I see down here, and then continue through my sequencing for just phase 1 and 3. Or if I'm only concerned about phase one for these mapped routes, I can jump over to just one only and then resequence these based on phase or drag and drop based on phase. Good question.
And then another question that we have here is, could you marry the sales and delivery stops in mapped routing? So example, if we have a holiday routing with system 521 function, could you marry those sales and delivery stops?
That is a good question. And I don't want to provide an inaccurate statement. So I'm going to take that down. And Alex, can we grab some user information and follow up on that one?
Yeah, of course. And with that one, Mike, too, I see your other question. I'm going to go ahead and follow up with you with that one at a later date as well. So we'll go ahead and get back to you on your two questions.
Right. Cool. Well, I hope everyone took away a few nuggets of knowledge on our routing tools. Again, my name's Chris, and thanks for hopping in our webinar.
Yes, thank you, everybody. I will give it. We do have one more minute for questions. So if there are any immediate last ones, please feel free to go ahead and throw them in. While we do wait for that extra minute, again, I want to thank Chris for today for presenting. If you do have any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out to support, to Bev, to us as well, and we will get back to you. This session will be uploaded in the recording archive that you can find by end of day. So if you want to go back and rewatch it, please go ahead and head over there. There is a survey that will be added to this. We really appreciate your feedback. So if you have a moment, please take it. Let us know any feedback or any questions that you did have or any future sessions that you want to see. If you don't have time right now, it will be emailed to you at a later date as well. So we appreciate all your feedback. And with that, I'm not seeing any immediate questions come in. So we're going to go ahead and end this session. So thank you all again for joining and thank you, Chris, for presenting today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all.
Have a good one.